Hello, church. Over the years, God has accumulated quite the trophy haul of accolades and titles and awards. And I have some serious questions as to how many of those are warranted or deserved. There's got to be an entire wing, for example, just dedicated to natural disasters that we have blamed on God. But the part of the trophy exhibit that I think about the most often is found in the ancient Latin display under O for omni. For centuries, we have burdened God with our expectations of what it means for God to be omnipotent, omnipresent, and omniscient. I say burden because we have taken these biblically founded ideas and we have manipulated and tarnished them thoroughly. We have fruitlessly debated whether God is omnipotent enough to build a triangle with four sides or to create a rock so big that even God cannot move it. We've attached the omnipresence of God with theoretical physics, and we have even reduced omniscience to a creepy yard sign that makes your privacy feel violated when you drive by. So please leave that all behind and exit the omni wing of the unfair and misused ideas about God trophy exhibit before I read today's psalm to you. Especially abandon the creepy, guilt-infested view of God's omniscience and the existential crisis about God's omnipresence as I read Psalm 139, the words of the Lord. O Lord, you have searched me and known me. You know when I sit down and when I rise up. You discern my thoughts from afar away. You search out my path and my lying down, and are acquainted with all my ways. Even before a word is on my tongue, O Lord, you know it completely. You hem me in behind and before, and lay your hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It is so high that I cannot attain it. Where can I go from your spirit? Or where can I flee from your presence? If I ascend to heaven, you are there. If I make my bed in Sheol, you are there. If I take the wings of the morning and settle at the farthest limits of the sea, even there your hand shall lead me, and your right hand shall hold me fast. If I say, surely the darkness shall cover me, and the light around me become night, even the darkness is not dark to you. The night is as bright as the day, for darkness is as light to you. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Test me and know my thoughts. See if there is any wicked way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting. So it's time to polish the grime and the baggage and the misapplication off of God's omniscience and omnipresence. There are centuries worth of junk that has clouded our understanding of these words. And Psalm 139 gives us what we need to clean that all off and find comfort in these very loaded ideas. How is it that the psalmist can be so happy about God knowing everything that they do when we cringe and try to avoid that very thought? And how can the psalmist so blindly find comfort in God's presence everywhere without uselessly poking holes at the science of such an idea? Now, first, we need to accept that we may not be talking about the same God. One is a divine helper, a comforter, a creator that is bigger than the creation. And the other seems to be like a spy who's only interested in collecting some kind of dossier to use against you and finds Newton's physics to be a hindrance. I don't know about you, but I'd rather worship the God of Psalm 139 than the one that lurks in the shadows spying on me. Second, we need to question the perceived motives of such a God. Is God omniscient and omnipresent so that God can watch and catalog our every good deed and sin? Or is God omniscient and omnipresent simply because that is who God is? And if God is also good and loving, then would a good and loving God use abilities like omniscience and omnipresence in any other way than for good or love? Of course not. And Psalm 139 paints such a picture of God, using knowledge and presence to help and guide and comfort. But if the picture painted by Psalm 139 isn't your style or your artistic taste, then I'll show you two other portraits. The first is from the OC Supertones, a Christian ska band of the 90s and early 2000s, who once wrote a simple but true song titled Like No One Else, in which they penned the following lyrics. This is a time for us to celebrate our emancipation. Voices ring across the nations. There will never be another that there has never been. Helpless, and you took us in. Because of Jesus Christ, we know salvation is secure. I don't worry anymore. Who can give you counsel, Lord, and who can search your mind? You're before me and behind. Every time I shed a tear, it matters. Every time I'm cold with fear, it matters. When I got a broken heart, it matters. Every time I fall apart, it matters. When I think I'm all alone, or on the road, or when at home. Every time I have to sneeze. When I'm in a dentist chair, it matters. Anywhere and everywhere, it matters. He cares for you like no one else. In the same spirit of Psalm 139, this more modern song sings the truth of the comfort of knowing that God is with you always. It highlights that there has never been a moment of your life in which God abandons us to our own desires, or the traps of sin, or the pains of life. And not because God is a spy, but because God cares for us, like no one else ever could. God's presence in our lives is driven by an unprecedented and unmatchable care and love. But if 90s ska music isn't your artistic preference, let me suggest this prayer from the 5th century, found on the tomb of St. Patrick and attributed to him. He wrote, I arise today through God's strength to pilot me, God's might to uphold me, God's wisdom to guide me, God's eye to look before me, God's ear to hear me, God's word to speak for me, God's hand to guard me, God's way to lie before me, God's shield to protect me, God's hosts to save me from snares of the devil, from temptations of vices, from everyone who desires me ill, afar and near, alone or in multitude. Christ shield me today. Christ with me, Christ before me, Christ behind me, Christ in me, Christ beneath me, Christ above me, Christ on my right, Christ on my left, Christ when I lie down, Christ when I sit down, Christ in the heart of every person who thinks of me, Christ in the mouth of every person who speaks of me, Christ in the eye that sees me, Christ in the ear that hears me. I arise today through a mighty strength, the invocation of the Trinity, through a belief in the threeness, and through a confession of the oneness of the Creator of creation. This prayer, again, is emphasizing God's presence in our lives, not as a burden, but as a blessing. The prayer begs for God's presence everywhere, in our words, and how we perceive the entire world, and how the world sees us, everywhere we go. There is even a desperation in this prayer that you can see hints of in Psalm 139. There's this idea that we won't make it or survive this life if it weren't for the constant presence of God. And shouldn't we all desperately crave the presence of God in all aspects of our lives? And if we don't, is it because we don't know the true God, or because we don't believe that God could be part of our lives and truly love us? This level of intimacy requires a vulnerability as you lay yourself bare before God. And it requires faith that God can see everything in your life and still choose to love you. And maybe, just maybe, the reason we struggle so much with God being all-knowing and always present is simply because we cannot comprehend how God can know everything about us, be everywhere we've been, and seen all that we have done, and still be compassionate and forgiving and loving to us. But God is, always has been, and always will be. So embrace that presence of God. Let God be part of your life. Crave that presence. And accept the omniscience and omnipresence of God's love. And then, no matter where you are or what you're going through, you will always have peace. So may the Lord bless you and keep you. May God make God's face to shine upon you and give you peace.